David stood motionless at his father's grave, the weight of loss pressing heavily on his chest. His father had died suddenly, a heart attack that no one saw coming. As he stood there, grappling with the silence, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Kendra, his wife. "I'm going to work, don't bother me today." The words stung. How could she be so indifferent? He had been trying to ignore the growing rift between them, but now it was clear. Their marriage was beyond repair. His heart, already broken by the loss of his father, now shattered from her coldness. That moment, standing alone in the cemetery, David made a decision. No more. He would never let her treat him this way again. And so, a new chapter began, one of strength and resolve. The first step was already in motion. David couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal as he read Kendra's text for the third time. His father had just passed, and she didn't even acknowledge his grief. She was too busy with her own life, as usual. He had been thinking about this moment for months, the growing distance between them, the lack of empathy, the constant disregard for his feelings. But this was the breaking point. As the day dragged on, David's mind raced. He knew what he had to do. He needed to take control, to end this chapter once and for all. It was time to stop pretending everything was fine. The next day, David was already taking the necessary steps to finalize everything. The house was quiet, empty of both Kendra and her presence. He had been to see his lawyer earlier in the day, making sure the paperwork was in order. With everything settled, David could now focus on severing the last remaining ties to Kendra. He felt no guilt, only a steady resolve. His lawyer had assured him that the divorce would be straightforward, given the circumstances. David had nothing left to lose. It was time to fully reclaim his life. By noon, David had already contacted the utility companies. He canceled all of Kendra's accounts, the electricity, the gas, the internet. He didn't want her to be able to fall back into the comfort of their old life. She had made her choices, and now it was time for her to face the consequences. No more free rides, no more luxuries. David wanted to ensure that when Kendra came home, she would know that this was real. She would understand that the life they had shared was gone. He then called a locksmith. The door locks needed to be changed. David wasn't taking any chances. He couldn't let Kendra come back and barge in as if nothing had happened. Once the locks were replaced, David knew that the house was his, and hers was no longer part of the equation. The finality of it all hit him in waves. There was a small part of him that had hoped things would work out. Maybe she would realize how wrong she was, apologize, and change. But that was a fantasy. He had been living that dream for too long. Around 3 p.m., Kendra texted him again. She demanded to know why he hadn't answered any of her calls. She was furious. He ignored it. The message was just another reminder of how far gone their relationship had become. It wasn't even worth responding to. David had already made his decision, and nothing Kendra could say would change that. The following hours were spent ensuring everything was packed and out of sight. He wasn't just moving out, he was making sure there was nothing left for her to claim. Her things remained untouched, but everything of his was gone. The furniture he had bought with his own money, the books he had accumulated over the years, all packed up and taken. He even made sure that the kitchen was stripped of the things he needed, leaving only the bare essentials. The house was a shell, nothing more than walls and floors. When Kendra finally returned home that evening, she would be met with the sight of emptiness. David had no idea how she would react, but he wasn't worried. He knew he had made the right decision. She could no longer control his life. The past was gone, and with it the shackles of a marriage that had never truly been equal. As he sat in his car outside the house, he felt a strange sense of calm. It was over. There was no turning back. And for the first time in a long time, David felt free. The next morning, Kendra returned home. It was late, and the house was eerily quiet. She stood at the door for a moment, fumbling with her keys. When the door wouldn't open, her frustration quickly turned to confusion. She tried again, this time more forcefully. Still, the door wouldn't budge. Her mind raced. David was supposed to be gone, right? Was he still here? She pulled out her phone, calling him repeatedly. No answer. Panic began to set in. What was going on? She could feel the anger rising. How dare he change the locks? How dare he leave without any explanation? She wasn't going to let him get away with it. She called again. Nothing. Kendra tried to reach out to a locksmith, but none of them would come without proof of ownership. She started to pace in front of the house. She had no idea what to do next. Her thoughts were a blur. She felt trapped. After several hours, her frustration reached a breaking point. She sent David a text. "What the hell did you do? Let me in." The message was raw, desperate, and full of anger. She stared at her phone, waiting for a response, but none came. She sent another, then another. Her fingers trembled as she typed. The words were harsh. "You've ruined everything. You think I'll just forget about this?" She hoped he would crack, would at least respond. But he didn't. The silence was deafening. David had made it clear he wasn't going to engage with her anymore. She couldn't understand it. She had always expected him to come crawling back, but now she was the one left standing in the cold. Her mind went to the worst possible places. Was this really happening? Was David really done with her? Finally, she decided to contact a lawyer. She wasn't going to let him have the upper hand. She needed answers, and she would do whatever it took to get them. She could feel the walls closing in. As the lawyer confirmed that the divorce papers had been filed, Kendra's anger turned to panic. She was losing control. She thought about the things she had left inside the house. Her clothes, her belongings. She couldn't just walk away. She wouldn't. Kendra called a locksmith again, this time demanding immediate service. She needed to get inside to claim what was hers. When the locksmith arrived, she rushed him to change the locks, despite his protests. She paid him handsomely, wanting nothing more than to feel secure again. But when the locksmith finished and the door finally opened, Kendra stepped into a house that felt cold and unfamiliar. It was empty. The silence seemed louder now. David had truly gone. She ran through the house looking for any sign of him, but there was nothing, not even a trace. The realization hit her hard. David was gone, and this time. He wasn't coming back. Her texts, her anger, everything she had done, nothing had worked. David had moved on. And in that moment, Kendra knew her world was falling apart. Kendra's frustration only grew with each passing day. She couldn't understand why David had walked away so easily. How could he just shut her out like that? She wasn't going to let him get away with it. She wasn't the type to be dismissed. Determined to regain control, Kendra began to plan her next move. She would fight back. She would get her life back, no matter the cost. She started by hearing a lawyer, a ruthless one. She told him her side of the story, painting David as the villain who had abandoned her without any warning. She was the victim in her mind, and she needed someone to fight for her. The lawyer assured her they would fight for everything, her assets, the house, everything David had taken. Kendra was ready. She wasn't going to let David take everything and leave her with nothing. The first step was to file a motion for him to return her property. She made a list of everything she wanted back: her clothes, her jewelry, some old photos, and even the furniture David had taken. She painted herself as the innocent wife who had been left without any consideration. The lawyer filed the paperwork, and Kendra waited for David's response. She was confident that he would crack. He had to. But David didn't crack. Instead, he responded through his lawyer, rejecting her claims. He stated that all items in the house had been legally his, and Kendra had no right to demand them back. Kendra's lawyer tried to push the issue, but David's legal team was sharp. They countered every move Kendra made. They questioned her actions, pointing out her lack of professionalism at work and the false claims she had made to damage David's reputation. Kendra couldn't believe what was happening. She had always believed that David would fold under pressure, but instead, he was standing firm. Each time they went to court, Kendra's lawyer came back with nothing. David's team dismantled her arguments, one by one. Kendra's own lies were being exposed. David had evidence that contradicted her version of events. She had nothing to say in her defense. As weeks passed, Kendra's anger grew. She tried to escalate the situation by sending more letters, making more phone calls. She even tried to get her friends involved, asking them to pressure David into a settlement. But David wasn't backing down. His lawyer was relentless, and with each failed attempt, Kendra's position weakened. In the end, David emerged victorious in every legal battle. The judge ruled in his favor, dismissing her claims and ruling that she had acted in bad faith. Kendra was left with nothing but her own bitterness. She had tried to manipulate the system, to manipulate David, but it had all backfired. David's resolve had been unshakable. He had exposed her for who she truly was, a woman willing to do anything to get what she wanted, no matter the cost. Kendra didn't take the defeat well. Her bitterness turned into self-doubt. For the first time, she questioned everything she had done. She had lost. And now she had no one to blame but herself. Kendra's world began to crumble around her. The legal battles were one thing, but the fallout from her actions was something far worse. She lost her job at the marketing firm after her unprofessional behavior became impossible to ignore. She had spent too many nights out partying, neglecting her work, and her boss had enough. The company couldn't tolerate her erratic behavior any longer. She had always thought she could get away with it, that her charm and confidence could carry her through anything. But now, with no job, no husband, and no support, she felt the walls closing in. Her life had become a series of failed attempts at regaining control, and it seemed like nothing was going her way. Kendra's friends, the ones she thought she could count on, began to distance themselves. They didn't want to be associated with her anymore. They had all seen her for what she truly was, a woman who manipulated others to get what she wanted, no matter the cost. People started whispering behind her back, and the judgment from the people she once called friends was unbearable. Her social media, once filled with flattering photos and happy updates, now became a place of public humiliation. Her attempt to manipulate her image and create a new persona backfired when the truth about her lies and deceit started to surface. People began to see her as a liar, a woman who was willing to do anything, even fabricate stories, to tear David down. She had underestimated how quickly everything could turn against her. The final blow came when a tabloid exposed Kendra's attempt to fabricate a fake dating profile to make David look bad. She had gone to great lengths to stage a story, hoping it would hurt David's reputation and distract from her own mistakes. But the plan backfired spectacularly. The public saw her for who she was, a woman who was desperate to hold onto her past life, even at the expense of her integrity. Kendra was humiliated. She had lost everything. The glamorous life she once thought she could always rely on was gone. She had alienated the people who mattered most, and now she was facing the consequences of her actions. Soon, she found herself living in a small, dingy apartment in her mother's basement. It wasn't the life she had envisioned, but it was all she had left. She didn't have a career, she didn't have friends, and she certainly didn't have David. The man she had once believed she could manipulate and control had moved on without her, and there was nothing she could do to stop him. As days turned into weeks, Kendra's bitterness turned into deep regret. She realized she had thrown away everything that could have mattered. She had been so focused on winning, on getting back at David, that she hadn't seen the damage she was causing to herself. The life she had once lived, the high-status, carefree life, was gone, and now all she had was the fallout from her own decisions. Kendra had fallen far, and it seemed that she was alone. As Kendra struggled to rebuild her life, David moved on with surprising ease. He had faced the heartbreak, the anger, and the overwhelming weight of losing a marriage. But now, standing in the aftermath, he felt nothing but relief. The pain of his father's death had been unbearable, but the pain of his marriage was something different, something he could now leave behind. David had found a new job, one that challenged him and allowed him to grow professionally. It wasn't the glamorous position he had once dreamed of, but it paid well, and it gave him purpose. Slowly, he started to feel like himself again. No longer burdened by the constant tension of his failed marriage, he threw himself into his work and his new life. It wasn't long before he met someone new. Her name was Emma. And she was everything Kendra had never been. She was kind, understanding, and most of all, she respected David. He didn't feel the need to explain himself to her. She listened when he needed to talk but never pushed him. She understood that his past, though painful, had shaped who he was. With Emma, David found the peace he had been desperately seeking. The relationship grew, and with it, David's sense of self-worth. He began to trust again, to believe that there was love outside the toxic walls of his past marriage. Emma didn't demand anything from him. She didn't judge him for the mistakes he had made or the scars he carried. Instead, she accepted him as he was, a man who had been broken but was now healing. Meanwhile, Kendra's life had taken a darker turn. She had tried to make amends, to fix what had broken, but the damage was done. She had no friends, no job, and no dignity left. Her lies had cost her everything. The public humiliation, the failed attempts at revenge, had left her a shell of the woman she once was. Her mother's basement was the only place she could call home now. The space was dark and oppressive, a constant reminder of how far she had fallen. She spent her days scrolling through social media, watching David's life unfold. Each post, each photo with Emma felt like a punch to the gut. She wanted to reach out to beg him to come back, but deep down, she knew it was too late. She had pushed him away beyond repair. David, on the other hand, had no regrets. He had made the right choice, even though it had hurt him deeply. He had let go of a toxic relationship, not because he wanted to, but because he had to. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. As months passed, David's confidence grew. He didn't need Kendra's approval or validation anymore. He had found something better, something real. Emma was his future, not the chaos and drama of his past. He was content, truly content, for the first time in a long while. Kendra, however, continued to spiral. She couldn't escape the shame of her choices. She had burned every bridge, and the loneliness that had once been a distant feeling now consumed her. She could no longer hide from the reality of her actions. As David built his new life with Emma, he often thought back to the lessons he had learned. He had learned that sometimes letting go was the only way to move forward, and in doing so, he had found peace. Kendra, lost in her own regret, was left to face the consequences of her own choices. The life she had once dreamed of was gone, replaced by the haunting truth of what she had lost. The price of her actions was too high, and she would never be able to get it back. David stood at the edge of the life he had rebuilt, the weight of his past now distant, almost insignificant. He had learned that some battles weren't worth fighting. His marriage to Kendra had been one of those battles. It had taken everything from him, but now, standing beside Emma, he knew he had made the right choice. The pain had faded, replaced by a new sense of peace. Kendra, however, was still trapped in the consequences of her own actions. She had lost everything: her job, her reputation, her dignity. No matter how hard she tried, there was no way back. She could see David moving on, living a life she had once thought was hers. It gnawed at her, the realization that she had destroyed it all. David had no regrets. He had walked away from the chaos, and in doing so, he had found peace. He had learned that sometimes, the hardest decision is the one that leads to freedom. As for Kendra, her life had unraveled, and no matter how much she wished for a second chance, it was too late. She had burned all her bridges.